And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm meteorologist David Kramer with Alaska Weather. Thanks for joining us for the marine segment today. Starting off with our ice edge, from a broad point of view, from the Chukchi Sea through the Beaufort Sea, we are looking at ice slowly melting, slower than average. And zooming in a little bit along the Arctic coast between Utqiagvik and Kaktovik, ice is also melting along or near to the coastline. Taking a look now at some of the weather that'll be driving our marine forecast, we do have this stationary low out over the central Bering Sea that is going to bring rain throughout the Bering Sea and near the Aleutian Islands as well. But then also we're going to see winds flowing around this low, seeing westerly winds on the south side of the low, southerly winds on the eastern side, and those are going to be a little bit stronger than what we see in a lot of other places around the state. Out over the Gulf waters, a fairly weak flow is expected, a weaker low down in the eastern portions of the Gulf, bringing in some rain to the eastern Gulf and into the inside waters of the Panhandle. As we move into Monday, high pressure starts to build in, so keeping some weaker winds throughout much of the Gulf waters into the inside waters of the Panhandle. But as we look out by the Bering Sea, we are going to still have our low bringing rain through much of the Bering Sea, Aleutian Islands, and out towards the southwest coastline. And we're going to still have some stronger winds rotating around this low pressure system. So as we jump into the southeastern part of the state for Sunday, we're going to see some weaker winds out of a southerly direction becoming more variable as we get up towards the Yakutat area around 10 knots. And then in the inside waters, we're going to see some northerly winds up by Skagway and Lynn Canal area around 10 knots, becoming southeasterly 10 to 15 knots for the majority of the inside waters. Then on Monday, still fairly weak flow out of a primarily south to southeast direction in the inside waters, 10 knots for most areas, 15 as we get closer towards the south. Weaker winds around 10 knots through much of the rest of the Gulf, and then as we get to the far eastern portions of the Gulf, we're going to see winds southeast around 15 knots. As we move into south central, all throughout the Gulf waters and the northern areas, we're going to see variable winds around 10 knots. That's going to be true in Prince William Sound as well. As we get by the Barren Islands, things are going to pick up a little bit out of an easterly direction, 15 to 20 knots, and then weaker flow in the Cook Inlet area. As we move into Monday, going to start to pick up a little bit in Cook Inlet, southwesterly winds around 15 knots there, then picking up to 15 knots for much of the Gulf waters out of a southerly direction in the west and becoming more westerly as we get to the north. In the Prince William Sound area, westerly flow around 10 knots is expected. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island on Sunday, around Kodiak Island, easterly flow around 20 knots there, starting to weaken as we get to the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, only around 10 to 15 knots there, but on the Bering side, a little bit stronger, 15 to 20 knots out of an easterly direction. We'll see a little bit of gusts through some of the passes of the Alaska Peninsula. As we move into Monday, going to see primarily southeasterly winds throughout the whole area, 15 knots on the Pacific side, getting up to 20 knots on the Bering side, and 15 knots by Kodiak Island. As we look out over the Aleutians on Sunday, we're going to see south to southwest winds for the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, south to southwesterly for the direction. As we look at the western Aleutian Islands, pretty similar, just a little bit stronger, 20 to 25 knots out of a southwest to westerly direction. Then on Monday, we're going to see westerly to northwesterly flow, 15 to 20 knots for the western Aleutians. So look out over the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, south to southwesterly flow, 15 to 20 knots expected. Down the west coast of the state, primarily southeasterly winds, 20 to 25 knots for much of the area. As we get up into the Norton Sound area, quite a bit lower there, only around 10 knots out of the west. Out by St. Matthew Island, easterly winds 25 knots, and by the Pribilof Islands, southerly winds 25 knots expected. Then on Monday, we're going to see northeasterly winds by St. Matthew Island at 25 knots, 15 knots out of a southeasterly direction for the Pribilof Islands, then 20 to 25 knots out of the southeast south of Nunavik Island, then easterly flow 15 to 20 knots north of Nunavik Island, and once again quite a bit weaker, only around 5 knots in Norton Sound. Along the Arctic coastline, we're going to see southwesterly flow around 20 knots to the west of Utqiagvik, dropping down to 10 to 15 knots to the east. And then very weak flow, 5 to 10 knots as we get closer towards the Bering Strait. On Monday, still weak flow, 5 to 10 knots by the Bering Strait, picking up out of a northeasterly direction as we get to the northwest coastline, 15 to 20 knots there, and then 10 to 15 knots for the eastern portions of the Arctic coast. For Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for watching.